Enquanto você ouve suas músicas e podcasts favoritos, deixa eu te perguntar, você já sabe da novidade do ano? Chegou a nova Fiat Titano. A nova picape da Fiat faz bonito nos terrenos mais desafiadores. Performance com motor turbo diesel 4x4 e câmera 360 graus off-road, que ajudam você a ultrapassar qualquer obstáculo. Sem falar que ela tem a maior caçamba da categoria. Tá esperando o que para conhecer? Nova Fiat Titano, chegou a sua vez de fazer história. Paz no trânsito começa por você.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Entrando em contato com atendimento ao cliente. Para muitas pessoas é um jeito fácil de arruinar um bom dia. Mas na Zendesk, nós deixamos a experiência do cliente melhor. Melhor para sua avó, melhor para o seu vendedor preferido de flores, melhor para o cara do apartamento 3A, melhor para você, melhor para todos. Porque enquanto alguns dizem que o cliente sempre tem razão, nós dizemos que o cliente é sempre humano. E como seres humanos, queremos fazer algo melhor para todos nós. Zendesk, experiência do cliente com IA desenvolvida para humanos.
Our canvas is the imagination of the audience. Our paintbrush are our words. With our words, we create any image we desire on the imagination of the audience.
Have you ever wanted to be a guest on a podcast? Maybe you're actually wondering, how do I show up on Millionaire University? What do I need to do to get on these big shows that are getting hundreds of thousands of downloads every single month? Well, this episode is going to break that down for you. Welcome back, MU. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of not only how you can get booked on podcasts, but even what to do when you are on the show that helps you be a very effective guest. As a company that's focusing heavily on our podcast being our main platform and our main community builder, this is something we value very, very highly. And so we brought on the best of the best, Deven Rodriguez, who's going to break this down with us and for us. It's going to be a phenomenal interview. So let's dive in with Deven Rodriguez. Welcome to this podcast, which we're going to be talking about today. How do I get on other people's shows? How do you land a podcast like Millionaire University, where we're talking to so many successful entrepreneurs? Thanks for coming on, Devin, because this is a really important conversation for every aspiring entrepreneur to understand. Thanks for coming on.
First off, this is a plum-pleasing pleasure of mine being on this podcast, Millionaire University. You guys have one of my favorite shows, and I say that seriously. The work that you guys are doing is really important, and I hope the audience listening as well appreciates you as much as I do, because you guys are just doing really something special here with the show. So it's really an honor and a privilege of mine to be here with you today.
Awesome. I'm excited. I think we're going to have great insight to give everyone. So why don't we start into your background in podcasting, and how did we get to the point where you're at right now, where we're even having this conversation?
Sure. So I started off podcasting, having my own show 6.5-ish years ago after the sudden death of my grandmother. I was a young boy at the time. I was like 18 years old or something. I don't know, somewhere around there. But that really made me come to a realization. And that realization was that we only have one life to live. And in that moment, I was like, man, it really hit me hard, because sometimes in life, we don't appreciate something until we lose it. And for me, that was what happened in terms of life. That was really the first time that I understood how life was. So I said, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast, and I'm going to call it the One Life Podcast, and I'm going to teach other people how to take full advantage of the one life that they have to live. So that's when the One Life Podcast was born. Fast forward about 3 years, one of my childhood heroes was a gentleman by the name of Les Brown, great motivational speaker in the United States. And I went on Clubhouse, the application, for the first time. And I went in and I saw Les Brown was hosting a room. So I immediately freaked out. I'm like, oh my goodness. I joined the room and I go and I listen. And he's talking about he's going to teach people how to share their story and monetize their message and get on stages and do all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, count me in. Offered a $297 a month coaching program. I didn't have the money, so I put it on my 34% interest credit card that I got when I was 18 years old. Don't ask me why, okay? But I joined that, and within a few months, it radically changed my life. So much so that I had a woman named Heidi come to me one day on Clubhouse, and she said, Devin, have you ever thought about teaching this to anybody? I said, teaching what? She said, teaching people how to share their story, how to speak. I said, Heidi, that's not for me. I do the speaking. I don't teach the speaking. I got off Clubhouse. I went to go check my bank account. I had -$7. And I said, might be up to something. I went back to Heidi and I said, are you serious? She said, yes. So what that turned into was a coaching program that I started teaching people of storytelling and public speaking, specifically for business. However, to answer your question of how this whole podcast thing came to be, the biggest issue my clients had was they could tell a story like no other, but they would be done working with me and they would have nowhere to share the story. So I got to the point, I came to the realization, I said, I want to not only be able to teach them how to share their story, I want to actually be the one to facilitate them getting on platforms, AKA podcasts, so they can actually share that story. So since that time, since that idea, we booked some of the biggest names in entrepreneurship and online marketing on some of the biggest podcasts in the world. And that's what we do. It's a fine, delicate balance between not only getting you booked on podcasts, because there's plenty of companies that do that, but actually showing up in a way that you can retain the audience's attention and turn them from a listener into a lead. So that's a little bit about what we do and how we got to this point.
I love it. And I love how meta this conversation is going to be, because you're literally going to be implementing the very things that you do with your clients here on this conversation. If it's done right, by the end of this call, everybody should want to know more and want to connect with you. And we talked about that before hitting record.
100%.
That's something that's really important to us as a show, is to bring the most value we possibly can, which should be always the motivation of the guest, of you coming on to represent your business and your message and everything. So let's start there and just give some insight into anybody who's listening, regardless of where they're at, because this isn't just for people who are clear at the top, cream of the crop, right? This is for anybody. So where do we begin if we want to start booking this? Or if you want, we can start with how do we develop our story? Whichever direction you want to take it.
Oh, man. I mean, we might as well start from the story, because here's the thing I always tell people,
Okay.
Kirsten. Getting on podcasts is the easy part, but being a guest worth listening to is the hard part. So a lot of people think that if I just go on these podcasts, the leads are going to pour in and my business is going to grow exponentially. Not if you sound like a rock. So step number one is you have to work on your communication. In order to do that, we can just spend this whole time talking about storytelling. So I'll just give you the meat and the potatoes here. There's one quote that I tell all of my clients, and it's this. Whenever I'm on a podcast, whenever we're speaking, delivering our message, our job is to verbalize what they internalize. Let me give you an example, or let me describe to you what I mean. Kirsten, there's so many people in today's world that are silently struggling with something. I know I certainly am, and I'm sure the people that are listening are too. And when they lay their head down at night, they have these thoughts that go through their head that sound like, I don't know how I'm going to grow my business. Why can't I grow like other people? Why do I consistently struggle with my confidence? Oh God, I got to go to that job again tomorrow. We would never share that with anybody else. Those are the ult that we have internally. And here's the secret. If we really want to form a deep connection with the audience, all that they want is someone that makes them feel understood. So here I come along. I've studied my market. Not only studied, but I probably was my market, because you're best positioned to help the person that you once were. So with that being said, I have an idea of the thoughts that my audience currently has. Not the thoughts that they tell other people, but the thoughts that we were just describing when they lay their head down on the pillow. So now here I come, I'm telling a story, and there's two different ways that we can do it. We can say, I went through a really hard time in entrepreneurship. I really struggled and it was difficult. That doesn't really connect with anybody. But if I say, I remember that one time when I went to ClickFunnels or Funnel Hacking Live in 2023, and I had this beautiful, nice red Corvette that I had just bought for $95,000. I didn't have any right doing that. In fact, I delayed the payments 60 days because I didn't have the money to pay the $1,500 a month payment. I remember pulling up to valet and I said to the valet guy, how much is it? He said, you tell me how much. In the back of my mind, I knew it's going to be expensive. So I said, sir, I'm going to go to the ATM. So I went to the ATM, I put my card in there, and it said insufficient funds. What the heck is going on? Took it out, put it back in, insufficient funds. Took it out, put it back in, insufficient funds. So I went to finally go check my bank account, and I saw that I had been in negative $234 in debt. And not credit card, but like my checking account. I was negative $232 net worth. Not a good place to be. I just sat there and I looked at my phone and I was like, is this really what my business has come to? Is this really the path that I'm designed to go down? And it was in that moment at this event that I made a decision, as I looked around at all of these millionaires around me, that I knew my life had to change. All right, pause. I was detailed. I was descriptive. I didn't tell you that my life was hard. I showed you. So there's a couple of different things that are important here. Number one, we interpret the world with our five senses, the things we see, hear, smell, touch, etc. I tell a story, I want to be as descriptive as possible. I want to tell you what I heard, what I saw, what I thought, what I felt, what I smelled. I'm not going to tell you it's hard. I'm going to show you. So that's the first point. Don't tell people, show them. The second thing is I said, man, how much longer can I continue to live this way? So I expressed what I was thinking internally. I expressed it verbally in my story. Why? Because chances are somebody that's listening to the show, they're going to be in that same spot right now. So if I could speak to where they are, you're going to be like, wow, Devin really understands me. So we can go through so much stuff, but really the main point that I want people to take away, first and foremost, Kirsten, everybody on this call will be able to sell better, communicate better, have better relationships if we all can understand that our job, whenever we speak to anybody, is that our job is to make them feel understood so that they feel like we're on their side of the table, communicating with them, communicating to them. There's a big difference there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I would really say. It's about making people feel understood.
Wow. I love that. Verbalize what they internalize.
Yes.
That is a really great connection to make. And it's so true. I know I've been on the receiving end and the giving end of this. And sometimes it's hard to look back and be like, what did I do that was right in that sales conversation or in that presentation? What about that connected with people? And I think you just summed up so well how to fit what we love and what we're passionate about and our narrative into a structure that is going to have results and really serve. Because at the end of the day, if you're out there wanting to share your story and build a business, it's because you want to make a difference and you want to make impact if you're doing it right. There's plenty of people that come at it hopefully, ideally. The people who come on here, we definitely have, that's always the aim. So I really love that framing and that understanding. So when you attain that, when you build that story, when you really start to understand that, is there any more you want to speak to on that as well with really honing in on that?
Yeah, this is really good. So I'm going to break down a process that I call story mapping. Because here's a big problem that I used to see, and I still see with a lot of my clients. I want to share my story. That's what they say. What we fail to understand is that when we make that claim, it's actually pretty scary. The reason I say that is because when someone says, I want to share my story, what that implies is that you only have this one big life story to share. Is that the best storytellers are able to take seemingly ordinary experiences and turn them into extraordinary stories. So if someone's listening to this right now and they really want to become that person that can connect with any audience, looking around your day-to-day life and ask yourself the question, what did I experience today that I can turn into a lesson for someone tomorrow?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. My mentor, Les Brown, taught me this. He said, Devin, you never tell a story without a point, aka you never tell a story without a lesson for the audience. You never tell a point without a story. So if I want to tell you about something, I'm also going to tell you the story about that something. And if I'm going to tell you the story of a lesson that I learned about that something. With all of that being said, here's a story mapping process. This is what I recommend everybody do. Just do it for the next 2 or 3 nights. Ask yourself at the end of the day, what was one impactful experience that I had today? Just journal it. Just describe it. I was walking my dogs and this happened. I'm going to give you an example of this as well. Okay. The second thing is, why was it impactful? It was impactful because it really made me realize a couple of different things. I started looking at life differently. Okay. Number 3, what did I learn from this experience? I learned XYZ. But here's the thing. That's where most people stop. Another thing I learned on the journey was nobody cares about what you learned. The only thing they care about is what can I learn? So number 3 is what did I learn from the experience? But number 4 is what can my audience learn from that experience? So here's an example. This was a couple of months ago. I was outside walking my dogs and my big dog, she's not in the room right now, like this little guy that's upside down right behind me. You that cannot see this, my dog is upside down on his back. Anyways, so I took the both of them out. He's about 70 pounds. I have a Cane Corso, which is an Italian Mastiff. She's about 130 pounds. And I had her on the leash with just her collar. Not a very smart idea. If you're listening to this, do not advise. Don't try this at home. Okay, so we went outside, took her out into the grass, and she went and used the bathroom. I was going down to pick up her poop. Sorry, people. Bending down to pick up her stuff. But what I didn't realize was that as I was bending down, she was getting out of her collar. So I looked up and I was like, oh my God, this is not going to be good. So immediately I tried to run after her. But what I didn't realize was that as I tried to run after her, I actually dropped the other dog's leash. So now Stella, my big black Cane Corso, is sprinting throughout my apartment complex with dozens of other dogs. She's not dog friendly. And now I got Arlo, my other dog, sprinting in another direction. I just sat there for about 10 seconds as I saw them both run. And I was like, which one am I going to chase? And what that story taught me was that you'll never chase something unless you make the decision which direction you're going to go. Many of us just stay stagnant. So if you're listening to this, you might be in a position where you're trying to figure out, which way do I go in my business? Do I go on podcasts? Do I run ads? First step is to actually make a decision and commit. So I just took an experience of my dogs going to the bathroom, them running out of, turned it into a story which illustrates a point.
O que acende a sua vontade de começar algo? Tem uma faísca em você que te chama para empreender, investir, dar novos rumos para sua vida. E para todos os seus começos, você pode contar com Santander Select. Um banco mais pessoal, mais próximo, mais humano. Um time de especialistas com olhar atento para cada momento da sua vida. Porque você sabe, só quem já deu muitos passos está pronto para continuar começando. Santander Select. Começa em você, começa agora.
So that's really the second thing,
Yeah.
is that story mapping framework, which allows you to take an ordinary experience and turn it into an extraordinary story. And that's what the people that can connect deeply with an audience do. Why? Because not everybody can connect with my big life story, but they can connect about the time that I sat in traffic for 2 hours, right? So it's those little things, those commonplace experiences that actually move the needle.
Yeah, I've had experience with this in trying to even teach content on social media, creating videos. It's the principle applies across the board. And I try to explain to people, you have your macro story, which is basically what you're saying. You have your life experience, the big aha moment or the big success, the big pivotal moment. And then you have your micro stories, which is the relatable content that you can post every day. And I think so many times we get caught up in, and I do this. I'm like, how many more times can I share this big story? I'm so sick of telling it. And that's how you break it up. These micro stories contribute to the overall success. So is that when you have guests, and you may be getting to this anyway, but I'm just curious, when you're coaching and helping people prep to be great guests on podcast, do they have their trove of their little micro stories and those pieces that they can relate to, or do they follow the conversation? I doubt you came into this saying, I know exactly what stories I'm going to share, because you don't know what questions are going to be asked.
No,
so what does that look like to prepare?
What I recommend, and you guys could do this if you're listening, you don't have to be a client of mine. This is just something for you guys. You got to develop a story bank. And in that story bank, you have to have multiple stories under different categories. Here's a couple different categories. Like you just said, those defining moments. That's a category. What were my defining moments? Number 2, what were my transition moments? Okay, here's an example. Next week, I'm getting out of the military. That's a transition. From high school to college, transition. Living with my parents, living on my own, transition. And guess what? Everybody has those transitions, so everybody can relate. I'm going to pause that for a second to interject this point. The stories we tell are unique to us, but the lessons that they exhibit or the lessons that we share should be universal for all of our audience. Okay, so it's a caveat I wanted to throw in there. Okay, some other aspects. Number 3, what were some fears you had? That's another category. Jumping out of an airplane, example of that. Okay, another category could be, what were some difficult conversations you had? Everybody's had a difficult conversations. What was another time when you were really angry? Write it down. So these are just buckets that are common amongst all people. This is where things really get good. So this is what I recommend. In one column, you have what I call the trigger. The trigger is, okay, what is like a word or a phrase that I can think of that's going to trigger that story? So when I think of dogs running, my mind goes to that story. I think of out of planes, my mind goes to United States Army Airborne School. So just write in a Google sheet, and I'll even share it with you guys if you wanted. We'll talk about that later. Wasn't planning on it, but whatever. Okay. Wasn't really planning on it, but it's okay. And then what you want to do is you want to write a short description in the next column. Here's what happened, a little 2-sentence overview, just so you can jar your memory. But here's where things get super ninja. Next thing is you want to put in the next column, what was the inner dialogue that you had? I don't know if I can do this. I'm so scared jumping out of this airplane. What if I die? I don't know if this is going to work. I'm so terrified. Now, why do we do that? Because when I tell the story, I'm going to verbalize what they internalize. So I want to make sure I put my inner dialogue down on paper so I can remember what it was. Then the next one is, what were the feelings that I felt? I felt afraid, stressed, frustrated, and anxious. So now when I'm telling the story, I stood by the door and I just sat there. All I could think to myself was, Devin, how are you going to do this? And I felt anxious, afraid. I was staring out of the door. It was just black sky in front of me. And now I could turn it back onto the audience. I wonder how many people listening have ever felt like that in their life. Maybe it wasn't looking out of a door of a C-130 military plane, but how many of you have ever felt like you've been in a position where you were looking out at something daunting and you didn't know how you were going to do it? That's an experience, but now I could turn it back onto you, okay? That is what I say, is categorize your stories into different buckets that the common person can also agree with. Maybe not agree with, but they can understand. Everybody's had the tough conversation. Everybody's had a fear. Everybody has had a coach, a teacher, a mentor in their life that taught them something. But never forget, follow this, but tell a story without a point, and you never tell a point without a story. So that's really what I would say to that.
That's basically every great book, right? My husband gets so annoyed. He's like, I just need the Cliff Notes version, those variations of a really great personal development or business book that's just the core principles. And I'm like, give me all the stories. And that's also my favorite way to teach is through those stories, because that's what connects and helps us draw understanding much deeper than just the information. Information doesn't lead to transformation, right?
Can I share one more thing on this?
Yes, please.
So the thing we have to realize, and that's such a great point, which will go towards the number one mistake that I see a lot of podcast guests do, try to be perfect. They try to talk about all this crazy business stuff, and it's like, what? That kind of like goes over your head, because what people don't realize is that we don't think in information, we think in images. So our job, whenever I'm on a podcast, speaking on a stage, doesn't matter. I want you guys to remember this. Your job is to be an imagination activator. Here's a great analogy, or metaphor rather. There's a great book called How to Sell Your Way Through Life by Napoleon Hill. And on the very first page of that book, this is the comparison that he makes. He says, Picasso, when he paints on a canvas, and with his brush, he paints anything that he wants on that canvas. In a similar way, you and I, as communicators, as speakers, as salespeople, which we all are, by the way, if you're listening to this, our canvas is the imagination of the audience. Our paintbrush are our words. With our words, we create any image we desire on the imagination of the audience. So it's really how we're utilizing our paintbrush, how we're utilizing our words. Are we being descriptive, or are we just saying it was hard? Because if I just say it was hard, that doesn't really produce an image. But if I say, I looked at my bank account, I had negative $234, and I had $34.99 overdraft fees for the past 6 days, and I just stood there with a pit in my stomach, they're like, felt like I was there with you, right? So that's a really big point there, is that you got to really get descriptive with it. And we could spend all day talking about this, but don't try to be perfect. A great quote, and I'll end off on this. There's a quote that says, I think it's by John Gordon. He says, nobody cares about your successes until they know you understand their failures.
Wow. Man, talk about soundbite treasure trove on this episode. You brought so many great things, and I love me some Napoleon Hill. Those are such good insights. And I think if you're listening to this right now, you guys, and you're not taking notes, you absolutely should be. You've given us so many good tools so far. And I think for me, I'm hearing, you don't want to be coachable, right? I always want to be coachable. And I'm like, so that's why that story has worked. And that's why sometimes when I get into this frame in my messaging and everything, it doesn't work. And it's really quite simple. If you take the time to do what you just said in the spreadsheet, create the stories so that you can pull on real experience. We're humans connecting with humans. We are all salespeople, but we're people. That's the most important part of being a salesperson, right? It's person to person. So with that being said, let's kind of transition over. Now that we have this story developed, we've really done that work. How do we get on these podcasts? It is now such a saturated marketplace. When I started my show 8 years ago, there was nowhere near this many. It was just like, please, everybody, please start some podcasts so we have some places to go. Now that's not really an issue. So how do we differentiate, or what do you recommend when trying to get booked on these shows?
Sure. There's a couple of different things. It is getting more popular, but the reality is compared to YouTube or Instagram, there's only about 4 million podcasts in the world right now. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for the opportunity to really explode your marketing and help you become more well-known, get more authority, credibility, podcast is definitely the place to do it. Why? Because number one, it's rapidly growing more so than anything else. And then number two, there isn't as much competition on it. It's like Facebook ads in 2010 or 2011, whenever it was. You can pretty much get free leads. Now it's a little bit different. Obviously, you don't have to necessarily pay to get on podcasts. That's a whole nother discussion that we can have. Should we do it? Should we not? I think you should. But anyways, so let's talk about that. There's a couple of things that go into it. Number one is understanding human psychology. The biggest mistake I see people make, and we could talk, I'll break down the entire pitch framework that I use. We could dive into all of that. All of that is useless if I don't first discuss this. If you want to get on podcasts, not just any podcast, but podcasts like Millionaire University, which has hundreds of ratings in the top, I think 0.5%, you guys are 1%, whatever it is. If you want to get on those shows, what you have to understand is this. A lot of people wanting to go on those shows. Now, with that being said, that begs the question, how do I stand out? The number one thing that you could do to stand out is to step into the shoes of the podcast host. Now, here's what I'll say. Being a podcast host for 6.5 years, I never accepted one podcast pitch from an agency in 6.5 years. I hated them. Why? Because they were all templated. They were all full of the same thing that they clearly didn't customize to me. They didn't make me feel special. They didn't, in the pitch, described to me what the benefit to my audience would be. They just made it all about them. So when I step into the shoes of the podcast host and I say, okay, what are the things that podcast hosts typically hate about being pitched? Number one, it's really long. Two, it's general and not customized to me. Number three, I can tell it's clearly templated. So what do? Oh, this is so good. And this ties so good into storytelling. If you want to get really good at persuasion, enter the conversation that is happening in the mind of your audience. So the conversation that's going on in the mind of a podcast host is sick and tired of reading these long pitches. They're not customized to me. They clearly didn't read the description of the podcast. They forgot to take out the word insert name in the template, which has happened to me multiple times.
Same here.
Oh my God. So I know all of that. So now when I go to craft a pitch, shall we dive into what a proper pitch should look like?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. It's a 4-part framework. It's what I call the CAST pitch framework. First thing, the C stands for connecting authentically. And it goes directly back to what we just talked about of entering that conversation. So I'll give you an example. I change it up all of the time depending upon the podcast, but it might sound something like this. Hey, Kirsten, first things first, I know you probably got pitched about 50 times today. So my promise to you is I'm going to make this least boring as possible and as short as possible. I'm going to say that straight off the bat. Why? Because I know you've been pitched 50. Everybody else started off with, hey, I would like to introduce you to Deven Rodriguez. He is the CEO, puts me to bed. So I'm gonna lean in to where you are and I'm gonna meet you where you are. Another great storytelling tactic, meet people where they are. So I'm gonna meet you there. I'm gonna say, listen, I understand you've been pitched a ton today, so I'm gonna make this as short and brief as possible. I'm immediately building that rapport and showing you that I understand your perspective. Okay, so connecting authentically. The first piece. The second piece is if you're going to pitch somebody, go listen to their podcast, obviously. I'm shocked by how many people do not do this. And specifically, check out 1 or 2 of their last episodes and include that in your pitch. Hey, Kirsten, I listened to your last episode with Deven Rodriguez. I loved when he was talking about the story mapping process, and I wanted to thank you for having him on because I learned so much. Oh, that person actually listens to my podcast. I'm going to talk about another secret tip at the end of this framework, something that we can really do to make it pop. But that's C, connecting authentically. I'm meeting you where you are, leaning into the conversation, and then I'm also going to tell you and show you that I'm actually listening to the show. So I got 3 more parts to dive into, but I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I think that's so important, and I love hearing this from a fellow podcaster because I'm right there with you. I get a lot of pitches, and Millionaire University, we get even more because we're such a good growing show. And I actually did this where I was creating some templates for other people who were like, how do I do a podcasting tour? What do I do? And I'm like, I don't even know. I haven't pitched myself. I've always just been invited. But if I were to, I had to do the exact same thing. What do I not want to read? When do I immediately close out of the email? And I've even paid attention to the ones, because it's very few. I think maybe twice I've brought somebody on who pitched themselves. And I went back and looked. And so I'm just going to agree with you wholeheartedly. That connection is important. And I'm excited to hear your bonus tip because I think it's important to listen to some episodes. But I've also seen the pitches where I can tell they didn't listen. They just pulled the title, or just like I can tell they glazed or grazed. And if you were to go a little bit deeper in that, you might have my attention.
Exactly.
If you told me a good takeaway, that's important.
Exactly. Just tell them.
If you can't take the time to actually listen, then you're showing me immediately that you don't have a ton of investment in making my show great. It's still self-serving.
100%.
Just my 2 cents.
I definitely agree with you. That's why pick a certain point through the episode, what you liked about it and what you learned. It's very simple. It's not going to take a lot of time neither. My pro tip to you guys is whenever you're listening to a podcast specifically for the intentions of getting on the show, put it on 2.5 speed or 3 times speed and just go as quickly as you can through it. Okay. Because I get it. I have all day to just sit around and listen to people's thoughts. I get it. So just put it on 2 times speed and just rock out in the car and be like, oh, that was really cool. All right, cool. So Kirsten, I don't want you to let me forget about this, but I also want to touch on the importance of subject lines and what are some good subject lines to use in the emails to get really high open and response rates. Okay, so there's C, then there's A, which is to articulate experience. So first is connecting authentically. The next section is going to be to articulate experience. So this is what it'll sound like. I'm bringing to you Deven Rodriguez, founder of podcastguest.io. Over the course of just 60 days, Devin scaled his business from literally negative $234 to over $100,000 per month. I'm going to put that in its own line. I'm going to bold it. Why? Wow, that person did XYZ. It just grabs attention immediately. Okay, another framework that I like to use is X time. This person has made X amount of dollars and or has helped X amount of people. Let me explain that. Over the past 60 days, Devin went from $0 to whatever, and he helped over 1,000 people get booked. Okay. Now here's the thing. People are listening to this like, Devin, I've only made like $50,000 and that's not impressive. Cool. So what $50,000? Talk about how many people you've helped instead. So let's go through this again. Articulating my expertise. Founder of podcastguest.io. I left out one part. So introduce who you are. I'm Deven Rodriguez, founder of podcastguest.io. I help some of the biggest names in entrepreneurship get on some of the biggest podcasts in the world. Over the course of the last, 5 years, I've generated over $200 million. I wish. And I've helped over 10,000 people get booked on X number of shows. So for whoever's listening to this, over the course of the past time frame, I've made this amount of money, or if you haven't made an amount of money that you think will make someone's eyes pop, I've helped this amount of people. Just like that value proposition. Just who you are, quick. That's articulating your expertise. It's pretty quick. Then we go to the next section, which is S, suggesting content. Now this is super important. You literally want to start a new section and the first line be, here's what most people want to talk to me about. What I see most companies do is in their pitch, they say this. Here's questions to ask Devin.
Yeah.
I want people to be cognizant of the frame, the switching, the little nuance. Here's what most people ask Devin versus here's things Devin can talk about. On one end, he's an expert. On the other end, it's here's just some things to ask me. Little difference, but big difference. So here's some questions, or here's some things people want Devin to talk about. How to get booked on top-rated podcasts even if nobody knows who you are. How do you actually turn listeners into paying clients? Okay, and I'm going to give 4 to 5 bullet points in how-to format. How to get booked on top-rated podcasts even if nobody knows who I am. How to actually convert podcast listeners into clients. How to turn one podcast episode into 30 pieces of content in how-to format. Give 4 to 5 of those. Make sure they all fit on one line. It shouldn't be too long. Here comes the next part. That's suggesting content. Right underneath that, what you want to say is, we could talk about this too. I've also attached my podcast one sheet where I included a bunch of titles for you so you don't even have to think LOL, exclamation point. Okay, why did I include the LOL, exclamation? Because I like to keep my pitches super informal, friendly. Yeah. This is the best advice, like you're writing to a friend. That's it. I see these pitches and they're like, Madam, Sir. I'm like, what the heck? Who is this?
Who's Madam?
Who's Madam? I mean, I don't even know how to spell Madam. But the point is what kind of email would I want to read? I would want to read one that's just nurturing, caring, shows me that they actually took the time to care. Connecting authentically, articulating my expertise, suggesting content, and notice this isn't really long. Like it's really not. And T is tying it together. Now, what goes into all of this? The first thing you want to do is you want to tell the host how you're going to help their show. So I literally put a section in my pitch that says how I will help grow your show. I'm going to enter the conversation in their head once again. Now, I know that most people that come on your show never ever share your episode with anybody else, and it's usually just a one-way transaction in terms of who gets value. So what I'm going to do is I pledge to you that I'm going to share this with my email list, my social media following of 125,000 people, and I'm also going to create short-form clips, and I'm going to post them online so that hopefully we can get you more traction for your show. More thing, I'm going to tell my colleagues to leave you a 5-star rating and review as my way of saying thank you. Oh, wow. Okay, and then I go down below. So listen, I would love to marry my expertise with your audience so that we can help them get booked on top-rated podcasts. You could totally, this is important, you can totally tell me to kick rocks, and I promise I won't be offended. Please let me know the next steps if you want me on the show. So the problem is too many people are connected to the end result. But I'm like, it's all good if you don't want to have me on. And then I'll end it with this. P.S. Just let me know either way so I don't keep checking my phone every 2 minutes. The point isn't to get on the show. It's to get a response.
Yeah.
So
that's an important distinction.
That's an important distinction. It's like on a sales call. My goal isn't to get a yes. It's to get the person to make a decision. So it's getting on the podcast. Great. But I want responses because then it gives me, I can grow. I can get better. More responses, more bookings. So how can I craft this in a way that's going to get responses? Okay, now here's the secret that I was telling you about. You want to have your podcast one-pager linked down below. We could talk more about what that looks like. I could go through it quick, but I'm not going to do that right now. And what you're going to do is you could put like a PPS. I left you a 5-star rating and review. See the screenshot below. Person left me a 5-star rating and review and they showed it to me. They really care about me. So that's something that I found makes a really big difference.
Wow. Those are really helpful tips. And I'm sitting over here feeling really proud of myself in a sense that these are things I honed in on for myself, now let me be completely honest, I never sent the pitch emails. I got freaked out, and I think I drafted a really killer pitch email based on everything you said. And I'm like, I wonder where that went. I wonder where that is. I just got distracted and pulled into other things. But I definitely think this is incredible feedback and incredible framework for people. Because like you said, this getting on podcasts is truly, I think the reason that it's such a beneficial thing is the connection value on a podcast is so much deeper than a one-off social media post or even just an ad where you can't accomplish a whole lot in 30 seconds or with one picture. So it's worth taking the time. I promise it's going to be tempting to just send out an email and send it to as many people as you can and just go for no. But at the end of the day, taking time to make this valuable. And like you said, hack the system, listen to it on 2x speed, but do it. Like, be intentional, because from the podcast host and the podcast guest sitting in both seats, it is so much more fun and so much more valuable when you have a genuine connection, when they're not just on there to pitch. Like, I've made so many tremendous connections and my network has grown in a huge way from the people I've had on the show, not even just my audience. I would say I've sold and bought from people I've had in that network more than anything else. So don't try and cut corners in that. It's so important to build those connections, and networking is one of the biggest advantages to podcasting. That was just me on my soapbox, but I
Totally
agree
agree with
wholeheartedly. Amazing. Okay, so what else do you have for us? I know that everybody listening is going to want to dive more in. You're gonna give us some great resources, but if you were to leave us with some, I don't know, words of wisdom, you've given us a great framework. Anything else you want to add that people need to know?
Yeah, I would say this one last thing. Email pitching is good, but it's not the best. Actually, I'm going to give you guys something that if somebody's listening to this and they want to get booked on 3 to 4 podcasts in the next 48 hours, this is exactly what I would do. There's a Facebook group called something like Find a Guest, Be a Guest, something like that. Has over 65,000 members. I actually have a Loom video. I'm going to give you guys the kitchen sink today, okay? I usually only give away like one thing, but I'm going to give away everything. So I have a Loom video that describes what I'm about to say, but I'm going to give it to you in a short form version right now. So you join this Facebook group, Find a Guest, Be a Guest. There's 65,000 people in there. When you join the group, here's what it is. The group is people that are looking for guests on their podcast, and then there's people that are wanting to be guests on the podcast. You don't want to mess with the people that want to be guests, right? Because you want to be a guest, so you're not going to hit them up. You're going to hit up the podcast host. Here's what you're going to do. And I hope there's somebody listening to this right now that is literally following this direction on Facebook inside of this group. You go to the search bar and you type in #FindAGuest. What you're going to do is you're going to type that in, and then you're going to go to the left-hand side of the page, and it's going to say most recent. You're going to click that box. And then guess what it's going to show you? All of the posts from recent, typically within the past 7 days, of people that are looking for guests on their podcast. Guess what I'm going to do now? I'm going to reach out. Now, here's what most people do. There's the thing that gets me about this group is there will be like 200 comments on the post themselves to be on the show. I don't know about you, but if I got 200 comments on my post, I sure as hell am not reading those long-ass pitches. Excuse my language.
Yeah.
So here's what I do. This is some ninja stuff. You go to their DM and you send them a video message. So you take out your phone like a big boy or big girl. You point it towards yourself, and this is what you say. It has to be less than 30 seconds. Hey, I'm Deven Rodriguez, founder of podcastguest.io. I saw your post in the group, and the reality of the situation is I know you weren't even going to read my pitch because you got 200 emails. Listen, I help people get booked on top-rated podcasts. I don't really know if that would serve your audience, but if you feel like it would, please just respond to this. Let me know. Would be honored to come on the show. Send. Boom. 30 seconds. And then I go, leave them a 5-star rating and review after I listen to their show, take a screenshot, and I drop it in the comment, in the DM. They have the video message, and they have my rating and my review. So then go back to their post, and this is the comment that I leave. Instead of leaving my pitch in this sea of comments, I shot you a video message in your DM. I tell you, every time I've done that, I stick out like a sore thumb and I get booked on shows. If somebody wants to get booked on shows within the next 48 hours, 100%, you do what I said and you don't get booked on a show. I would say I'd give you your money back, but I haven't charged you for nothing. Okay? So I don't know what I would do, but you can just say Devin is a liar or something because I'm not certain about that'll work for you. So that's the first piece, and really what's on the back end of that is what I just said, the importance being different from other people. So just because an email didn't work, why don't you send them a message on LinkedIn? Because LinkedIn didn't work, hit them up on Facebook or find a way to get in touch with people, but do it in a way that's genuine and authentic and different than everybody else. Everybody else is just sending a text message. Why don't you send a video message or a voice message? There's so many different things, but That's really what I would say
Yeah.
if somebody wants to supercharge this and get booked on a lot of shows in a really short amount of time. However, last thing, Kirsten, it's not about how many shows, it's about the quality of the shows.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we just talked about sliding into DMs as a really super powered way, but I think you mentioned a little bit ago the importance of subject lines when we are sending an
thank
email.
you.
So let's revisit that.
Sure. There's just some subject lines that are like proven and tested throughout the thread of all humanity. The goal is to get people to open the damn email. Okay. So what I like, a couple of different subject lines. Some of them are like super commonplace, and I honestly didn't think they worked because they're so popular until I actually started to use them, and we have 60% open rates. I was like, oh my goodness. First one is just the word question with a lowercase q. Else does capital. I do lowercase. Okay. Rule of thumb. If you want to be successful, just do what other people don't. Okay. Just do the opposite, really. Okay. Question. Another one. Question, comma, Kirsten. Another one that I like to use is my first name plus your first name, question mark. Devin plus Kirsten, question mark. So those are just some subject lines that I use that really gets great results time and time again. I really don't deviate from them. Pretty much just use those three. So yeah, those are just some, because people, they don't know what to put in the subject line. They're like, I want to be a guest on your podcast. Rule of thumb, keep it less than 55 characters, keep it short, keep it punchy. And what it should do is invoke curiosity. Question, what's the question? Quick question, what's the quick question? Me plus this person, who is this person? Just get them to open the email. And then if you do what we talked about here today, then you'll really be able to connect with them and get them to read the rest of the email and hopefully have you booked on their show.
Amazing. I know that I'm personally fired up again to go start pitching to shows because there's nothing I love more than having guests on our show. But I also love guesting. There's so much fun behind just being able to show up and connect, and then you're done. No editing is required. So I think it's such a fantastic way to promote yourself. I know you touched on paid interviews. Should you pay to be on podcasts? This is becoming more and more of a theme. And I think if you look at the return on investment, it might not be as easy to measure, but the return is going to be there. You can never, ever track the value of that connection made in so many different capacities. So I think stay open to that.
Can I make a comment? The problem most people have is that they don't actually have a strategy in terms of how to monetize it. Most people are still doing the old school traditional methods. They say, Kirsten, now I know this is coming up in a minute, Kirsten. Devin, what do you want people to do? Where do you want people to follow you? However you're going to phrase it, right? This is what most people do. First thing they do, which is absolutely horrid, is they just say, go follow me on Instagram at Deven Rod. Okay, that's great. But if my goal is to put dollars in my pocket and really help people at a high level, that's not going to cut it. The other thing that people do is this, and this just, come on, guys, we could do better. This is not 2005. The thing that people say is, go to devenrodriguez.com/free gift and download my lead magnet, whatever the lead magnet, right? Download my free guide on how to get on podcasts. Now, realistically, what are people trying to do? They're trying to get people to join their email list so that eventually, over time, their email list sells to them and they become a client. Listen, guys, I don't know if you're in the business that I am. I'm in the business of making as much money and helping as many people in the shortest amount of time possible. I just get people on my email list and pray to God that they become a client. That elongates my sales cycle. That makes things take longer. So what we need is a process where we get people to come to us, and this is what we do with our clients, is we teach a process where you actually create a back-end strategy that gets people to come to you personally, one-on-one, and say, Devin, I want what it is that you have. Now you're in a one-to-one conversation with a raging hot lead. What's more likely? Someone books a call from a email series that, what if they don't even get because it went to spam? What if they put the wrong email address? What if they forgot the URL? There's so many barriers there that doesn't make sense. So anyways, a strategy that actually makes sense so that you can somewhat track the return, because you're right. This is not like the Facebook ads library or manager rather, where you can see, okay, this is my cost per book call. This is my return on ad spend. It's a lot more complex, but it doesn't have to be that way. It just requires the right strategy.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you're transitioning us right into the end of this episode. This has been so fun just to illustrate the very thing that we're teaching. And you've done such a fantastic job of being the example of what you teach and just walking the walk and talking the talk. These are my favorite episodes when somebody comes on and they really know their stuff and the value is there and the servitude is there. So thank you so much, Devin. I've had such a good time hearing your strategies. I'm excited to move forward and implement myself. And then where can everybody go to continue to learn more about Devin?
Sure, absolutely. You know, the one thing that I'm constantly blown away by with this show, Kirsten, is your guys' willingness and ability to over-deliver for your audience. And I'll be honest, it truthfully inspired me to want to over-deliver for you guys too. So, oh man, listen, wasn't in my plans, but first things first. I'm gonna give everybody that's listening. I think we talked about the story bank. I'm gonna give everybody a copy of that story bank. There was something else, the Loom video, that's gonna show you exactly how to get booked on these podcasts utilizing the Facebook group. I'm gonna give that to you guys too. So put that to the side. And I'm also going to give you other stuff. So it's my way of over-delivering for your audience, just like you do. What I want to do is I want to give you guys something called my podcast pitch secrets. And really this is for the person that really wants to scale their business, but they don't necessarily want to spend a bunch of money on traditional paid advertising, or they're already spending a bunch of money on ads, but they have low show rates. They're spending thousands of dollars a month, and they want a way to really genuinely build trust with their audience. They want to get on big podcasts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the entire system that I talked about here today. I'm going to teach you two things. Number one, I'm going to give you an entire course that's going to teach you how to perfect the email pitch. I'm going to show you step by step how to do it, give you the templates, etc. But then the second thing, which I literally do not give away anywhere on the internet. So if you want to test me, you can go to podcastpitchsecrets.com, sign up, and you will not get what I'm about to tell you. So don't go there. You can if you want to test me. But if you do, you're going to miss out on this part. And that's going to be exactly how to pitch in the DMs to get booked on podcasts, which almost nobody is doing, but will get you so many more bookings on such higher quality podcasts that you'll be thanking me for years to come. I can promise you that. So if you guys want the Loom video, the story bank, and the podcast pitch secrets, it's very simple. Once you go to my Instagram, which is at Deven Rod, Devenrod. Once again, Deven Rod, Devenrod. And what I want you to do is I want you to send me the phrase. This is the key. University. So I know you specifically came from this podcast. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you all of this stuff until you go on your merry way, and we're going to have a really good time. So if you guys want access, I guess we can call it a bundle. I don't really know what to call it. Yeah, just go over to my Instagram and shoot me a message at Deven Rod, and make sure you say Millionaire University. Don't be hitting me up and saying all kind of crazy stuff, because then I don't know you came from here, okay? So that's my way of saying thank you. If you guys want access to all of that stuff, just shoot me a message. More than happy to share everything with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Love seeing this in action. Super excited to continue to connect with you. And again, thank you for my audience, or for our audience, and to you personally for coming on and sharing this. Great to get to know you, Devin.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Who's pumped and ready to go guest on some podcasts? I know I definitely felt validated in what I have thought might work in pitching myself to other shows. And I definitely know that everything Devin shared is exactly what's in the mind of a podcasting host. And just so you guys know, we do get dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of pitches per day. And I'm not saying that if you do this exact strategy, you're going to land on our show. We have our own strategies and things going on. But at the end of the day, this is a really great starting point and a way for you to start having conversations with the people that you want to talk to and the audiences that you want to share your message on. Thank you again, Devin, and all of our other show sponsors for this episode today. Understanding your story and how you can share that and building that story bank, all of these things were absolute gold. And I hope you guys learned a ton. So go and connect with us on Instagram as well. Be sure to comment on any of the posts that really resonate with you and tell us what you're loving about the show and what you want to hear more of. We hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode.